So now I have the pleasure of introducing Teresa. Teresa was born and raised in Camrose, Alberta. She went to college and university in Edmonton before moving to Morinville to raise her family. She's been the executive director of the Northwest Central Alberta FASD Service Network for the past 2 years. And after being in having regional involvement with FASD initiatives and service delivery in the province of Alberta. Teresa began caring for FASD-affected children as a child and youth care worker at the Atonement Home nearly 3.5 decades ago. The frontline work influenced her decision to continue working in this area, as well as becoming a single foster parent, a decision that she has been involved with her children for over 27 years, with more than 150 children and youth coming into her life, many of whom are prenatally exposed to alcohol. Teresa's experience as a family school liaison worker, a diversion worker, and a supervisor at early intervention programs also informed her current work in the FASD world. Teresa is committed with and helping in terms of helping communities work together in a collective way to support FASD prevention and intervention. Teresa is very, very passionate in terms of having care for the caregivers, and she has been very active provincially for us in Alberta. Teresa, you may know, as also a co-chair of our PCAP Council, that's the Parent-Child Assistance Program. She's also a member of the FASD Network Evaluation Committee. She's also a member of the FASD Service Network Guideline Review Committee, and as well as a member of the FASD Service Network Communication Committee. So Teresa has a very critical role in Alberta in terms of the 10-year strategic plan. Teresa is also a lifelong learner. She's dedicated to leading by doing, and we've seen numerous occasions of that. She believes in sharing information, distributing resources, and that has been fabulous on behalf of her work with the 10-year plan. So please join me in welcoming Teresa.
Today's session is around safety planning for the service provider, and that in and of itself sounds rather ominous. So I want to preface the presentation by talking about what is the greatest gift of the work and your greatest safeguard. And that's you as a service provider, and the fact that the work that we do is voluntary. The work that we do is relationship-based. And it's that relationship that is part of helping our clients and our community members come to trust us and also take care of us in the most helpful way. So I understand that people were having a hard time with the auditory. If folks could just send a quick email about whether or not this is working for you, that would be great, and I can hopefully adjust my voice to accommodate. My preamble for the presentation was as much as we are talking about safety planning, which sounds very ominous for our frontline service providers and agencies who hold contracts to do this work, want to start with acknowledging that the true gift and benefit and the safeguard is really the fact that we have relationships. We have relationships with our clients, we have relationships with our supervisors and within our organization, and we have relationships in community. So in fact, the fact that we are doing relationship-based work, while it puts us at risk in terms of how we're doing our work, is also our advantage. It is one of the things that provides us some of the protections and the safeguards that we will be talking about. So we'll start with what are the objectives, and you'll see me scanning over to the laptop screen so that I can stay on track. So the goals for today is want to provide us an overview of 4 risk management strategies, and these will be an overview. We won't go into great detail on some of them, and on 1 or 2 there will be an opportunity for more information to be shared. Also want to talk about and give some scenarios about some common risk factors service providers working with FASD clients in the way that we deliver our services. We'll classify some safeguards, and there will be some quick tips that are kind of put in throughout. So in some of the examples, there will be ideas. You'll see that some of the safeguards, the way that I framed them, will be in fact not discrete. There will be some examples where you might see it fitting in one category, but you could also see it fitting in another. And so we won't get hung up on the definition of how I've classified things. What I'm wanting you to do is to just hear the information and give some thought as to your practice, your policies and procedures, and what questions you might have. Welcome throughout comments and questions, and so please feel free to be using that keyboard and sending us questions and answers in the event that there are things that come up. So I'm not professing to have all of the answers for you, but want to facilitate this discussion. So in terms of risk management options, we know that we have no guarantees in life, that in fact pretty much everything we do will have some risk. So it's not a matter of totally avoiding all risk at all costs. It's about how to manage, and with a clear mind and thoughtfulness, actually identifying what are our risks, how do we limit those or avoid them or accept them. And so one of the first options for risk management is actually accepting the risk that comes with the job. So some examples of what would a risk management option of acceptance look like. So if we have a risk of getting ongoing referrals and our caseload is full, one of our risks is actually burnout as service providers. And when we accept that risk, it may be when we take into account that perhaps we know that we're going to be hiring another person to share the workload. Or we realize that even though on paper our caseload is full, we may have several clients that are missing in action. So we may actually accept a referral, understanding that one of the risks would be potential burnout. And in the back of our mind, we have some ideas of how we are managing that. A second example of a risk where we would accept the risk would be if we were to decide that meeting in the evening with a client would be something that's requested. And in experience, I would say that that often happens when we're wanting to work with both a mother and a father, or two caregivers, and one person works during the day. And so the only way to bring them into the service delivery is actually to arrange to meet with them at an alternative time, so outside of typical business hours. So there's a risk with that. And the risk would be the personal safety and well-being of the staff person for sure. We may decide to accept that risk if we have some things in place. And the examples that I've indicated would be, we've known the client for a bit and understand that there are some of those risk factors that we are comfortable accepting. They're in a stable relationship, they're in safe housing. We understand where they're at the moment, and we're willing to accept that there is some risk there, not a lot. From an administrator's perspective, one of the things you'd want to do is make sure that you actually have policy and procedures around evening work. What are the protocols around that? And that may be phone numbers. You may decide that in fact the only time that you're going to allow staff to do evening work is maybe if somebody's already in the office because it's payroll week and the executive director is there signing checks. And so there's someone to pick up the phone if there was a call. In Alberta for sure, and in other places as well, we have weather. And weather risks are things we have to accept unless we're going on an extended vacation to a tropical destination. So we have the risk of driving at minus 30 degrees. It's kind of borderline. Do you stay home? Do you go on the road? Do you work from home? And the hazard there is vehicle, putting our staff at risk with cold weather, and for rural and remote areas, we could really be in harm's way if, in fact, our vehicle decided to, not work for us. And if we decided that indeed we would allow staff to be on the road at minus 30, then one of the things we want to be considering are really, what's your driver's confidence level? Do they know how to change a tire? Do they have good cell phone access? Could they call for help if they needed? Is that vehicle well maintained? Are they driving on bald tires? Do they have a winter emergency kit? So again, when we decide to accept a risk, we need to have rationale behind that. And again, service providers, you want to know this because these are really practical considerations. Administrators, you care about this too because there's some policy and procedure implications around if you're going to have these things in place. In fact, what's your documentation to that? A second option for risk management is detour. And For detour, we're really saying, how can you avoid the risk? So we may identify that there are certain things that we simply are unwilling to accept the risk, and there are very few workarounds that we're willing to consider, and so the response is we're not going to do it. And that's where we have rules and regulations around. The answer is no. We're not doing this. So we may be very clear that giving our staffing and availability, work-life balance, there's going to be no client work done on weekends. And that's a policy and procedure that's put in place. Staff send that clear message to clients. We send that message to our referral sources. And it's actually one of the ways that we monitor when we're doing supervision and that kind of thing. Second bullet, I have no direct client work when under the influence of alcohol or drugs. And I don't mean the service provider. I am meaning, in fact, that if our clients are under the influence, that's where we decide to reschedule, and that we have a policy on that. And we may also have some training to support that. How do you recognize the influence of different drugs when someone is coming up or going down? And we, again, as administrators, need to document the training, who's attended, what did they learn, and also staff meeting agendas are another important point of talking about. If you're going to have these avoids, staff need to be supported in knowing when to say no. And so it's, I would caution us against using the term common sense. It's not as common as we think. We may also have policies around, we don't want our staff's personal life interfered upon. We want to make sure that they are kept safe, their privacy is protected, and so we may have a policy around only cell phone numbers are shared, and it's only the business cell phone that is shared. Again, these are examples. Within all of our agencies, we have different cultures, and so there will be some of these examples that are not a good fit. Feel free to just note that, and then think what else might you do to put in some of the safeguards. Another example of how to avoid trouble. Let's say you are working from home or you have a home office and you're doing client work, you would do the *6-7 so that your number is actually not visible to the person on the receiving line. Our third option is, how do you transfer risk? And this is really one that is very administrative in nature, in that it oftentimes has to do with insurance. When we are doing work that we are doing, we are at risk on the road. We're going into people's homes. We may be at risk. We see a lot of people, so we might be at risk for getting sicker. And so you might look at some of your insurance options around professional and business insurance, short-term disabilities, chronic illness insurance, both as an agency, but then personally as staff. Are those things that you're willing to assume some cost in order to have the safeguards? Transferring of risk also is about documentation. And so the risk is shared when decisions are discussed and they're documented. So whether that be about training or staff meeting discussions, changes in policies and procedures, perhaps even a mechanism by which you can run something by an individual to determine if you're making the best decision. So that transferring of risk is really, how do you bring other people into your life and into your decisions so that poor decisions can be limited. At this point, just ask if there's any questions or comments.
Teresa, can you ask people who are struggling with some of the video to just press refresh and it will come back? Just let the audience know.
Oh, okay. So folks who are having trouble with the video, we're getting advisement from our tech folks on this end. If you would please just press refresh on your computer. Because we're getting a few comments that may be losing the feed or things are getting hung up. So just, we're good to go? Excellent, okay. So the fourth risk management, and it's the last risk management strategy, is actually mitigation. And I think the photo that is part of the slide really is quite telltale, in that we know that there are risks that we have to assume. We can't avoid it. It's a little bit like the weather. You have to go outside. It's raining out hard, and what are you going to do to stay as dry as you can and to get from one place to another with the least amount of trouble? So mitigate is kind of a big word, and so some other words that might cue you around how you would approach this type of risk management is, how do you curb the risks, or lessen, diminish, alleviate? So again, you're talking about management in terms of you can't avoid it, you can't just outright accept it, you actually need to work around it. In order to make good decisions around risk mitigation strategies, this is really where we have to take a step over to the side and consider what we do know. And when you're going to use risk management mitigation strategies, you need two sides of the coin operationally up and running at the same time. One is you need to assess the risk, but you also need to assess your safeguards. And in order to do that well, the person who's doing the assessing needs to be mindful about who they are. From your perspective, what are the risks and the safeguards that you know of? What is it that you are actually seeing? And our view of what we see isn't the same based on our roles or our purpose. So from this slide, if you were standing at the top of the mountain looking out, what you would see would very much determine whether or not you were seeing this from a photographer's point of view, or a meteorologist's point of view, or if you were a survivor from a plane crash, or if you were a mountain climber. What you would be looking at would vary based on your role. And so the whole idea of assessing risk means that there's real value in us working collaboratively. An administrator will be assessing risks and safeguards from their vantage point, as will a supervisor or middle management, as will our service providers. So this isn't one person's job. This is actually a team approach if we want to be thorough, comprehensive, and responsive. One of the fears around talking about risk management is that risk is really about tapping into our fears. And one of the things that happens with fears is we get tight, which means we're less likely to be reflexive, creative, innovative, and responsive, because that requires some movement and some flexibility. And fear actually has the opposite effect. It kind of closes us in. So the more that we use a team approach, not only are we transferring risk, but we're also tapping into people's very valuable vantage points and things that they want to consider. For a good assessment of risks and safeguards, we also need to do an assessment of actually how are we doing as an individual, as an agency. Again, using this slide as a way to generate some ideas. If I'm at the top of the mountain and I am very healthy, I am well equipped, I am properly clothed, I am well fed, and I have enough fluids, I'm seeing this landscape from a very well-resourced point. Personally speaking, I would be looking at this, seeing things from that well-resourced and resilient place. Very different if I'm doing assessment from a place where I'm tired, I'm injured, I'm unhealthy, perhaps I'm hungry, maybe I'm thirsty, maybe I'm feeling very isolated. I'm going to see risks and safeguards from a very different place. And so when we're doing risk assessments and looking at safeguards, we are then looking to every individual, every agency, and our community around what is working well, so that we have a way of interpreting people's input. If somebody is coming from a place where they are feeling very under-resourced and very demanded upon, and they may have health issues, their perspective is valuable, and we also need to understand the context from which they're coming. So you can't just say doing an assessment is perhaps as black and white as we'd like to think. There's a real personal, intimate, interpersonal process that we need to acknowledge. So as we're assessing risks and safeguards, we are going to take into account physical, contextual, technical, and personal considerations. So it's a very holistic approach, very much like how we do our work, frontline, and how we're working in community when we're talking about FASD. Now for some examples. As a program supervisor, we were wanting to ensure that we had a training schedule for our staff who are doing home visitation, FASD work, early intervention, those kinds of services. And we talked to the staff and asked them what they needed for training. And you know, as the management, we had some ideas of what we were expecting. And particularly around where did they feel like they needed training to help them feel safe. They were working alone. They were out in rural and remote areas. A really complicated presentation of clients. So our list of training opportunities and options was really actually quite long. One of the things that we had not taken into consideration was that their greatest concern was actually driving. This is where we felt like we had been slapped upside the head with a 2x4 because it really was not on our radar. Like many of us, when we think about working with a client population that is overburdened, under-resourced, perhaps has lots of crisis going on with their life, not engaged with other services, we're thinking about one particular set of risks and also safeguards. So when we pursued further with the staff around, so tell us more about this safety concern for driving. They said, oh my goodness, I don't have cell phone reception in almost the entire area that we serve. One other person commented on, actually, I do not know how to change a tire. I have an AMA card for that. Which is fine if you've got cell phone reception and a service provider that's not too far away. Other folks talked about a real fear of animals and how anxious they got with being on the road, knowing that there were a lot of animals, and they're big animals, right? It's moose and deer. It's not the porcupines and the skunks that they were worried about. So getting that information really highlighted for us that there were aspects of the work that we hadn't attended to. And so driving for many of our FASD service delivery programs really require that we have a vehicle and that we are actually delivering services out in the community, using home visits, going to where our clients are. So it's a mandatory aspect of our job, and yet it doesn't get very much of our attention. So when we were talking about, well, what were the risks around driving, and you'll see some of the symbols that were on the road. There are cell phone, lack of transmission. Now with having a hands-free policy where you can't be a distracted driver, there are some other considerations around, oh my goodness, you know, I'm going to lose time. I'm late for my appointment already. I have to pull over to the side of the road, put it in park, and dial my number that way. We also have a long winter, and that means that our road conditions are oftentimes not at the best. So whether that be snow, very cold weather conditions, ice, fog, in the summertime, up in the Slave Lake area, smoke, where you have visibility problems. So, I mean, again, these are the contextual issues that change, and they can actually change on a dime. You can check the night before thinking you're going to go to work the next day, but in fact, if you need to drive an hour and a half to get to the community that you work in, and you get up in the morning, the weather has changed. What is a person to do? In Edmonton and area, I do have the construction sign up there because really, it is a risk. There are lots of accidents around construction sites. It has serious implications for scheduling of our time. And on one hand, that's kind of, you might want to just brush that off. But I invite you to just sit and think about yourself when you're stuck in traffic. What happens to your anxiety level when you need to be somewhere, you're not there yet, and things are not moving fast? It's gridlocked. Some of our detours are detours upon detours, and you know, if you listen to the traffic reports, there's sometimes where it's an hour-long wait. That's an inconvenience. However, as staff, when we get upset about being stuck in traffic, worried about our stats, you can't see as many clients, if you're late to a meeting, if you're late for supervision, those are all things that get documented. And it does have implications around how staff are feeling. When we are feeling anxious, feeling isolated, feeling like we don't have control, we may not be at our personal best to assess situations that we then walk into after we get out of the traffic. A funny story to share. Many of us who are on the road probably are guilty of going over the speed limit. And so, oh, I'm getting some looks here saying, oh, who, me? Yes, us. And so one of the driving concerns then is, in fact, are we putting staff in harm's way when we have an emphasis on punctuality? As opposed to, what's important is that you arrive here and you arrive safe. And that we truly mean that. That's not just a cute or an appropriate thing to say. I was in LA and was driving a family friend home, and I hadn't been to her place at nighttime, and so I was driving slowly. And I actually got advice to the opposite, which was, Teresa, hurry up and go faster. People are going to think this is a drive-by. So depending on your context, speed limit concerns can go one direction or the other. You can be going too fast or too slow. So it is important that we think of the context of these issues. Some of them are relevant for, more relevant for rural and remote areas. I would invite us to think about our urban setting as well. So it's fine to say, well, it's -40, but you're in Edmonton. You can hop a bus, you can go into a store. But what happens if that car breaks down in an area of town that isn't a particularly safe area of town, and it's -40? And perhaps you are not willing to go knocking on people's doors to ask for a warm place to rest until the tow truck comes. So whether our setting is urban, rural, or remote, I think these issues are important regardless. So here are some of the safeguards. So we talked about the risks, and so safeguards from a technical perspective. And this is not going to be all-encompassing and comprehensive. This is going to be just tidbits for us to get our creative juices going around. Have we thought of ways that we could mitigate the risk? We have to be on the road. It's part of our job. We live in Alberta. We've got construction. These things are beyond our control. How are we going to manage the risk? With driving, cell phones are a pretty important part of our life. We use it as a technical safeguard. This is one of the ways that we say, well, when people are in trouble, they can call. And we then have some glitches. One of the glitches, and it's happened more than once to myself, and I'm going to make a stab and say maybe all of us have had the experience of, you get in the car, you're on the road, and your phone is dead. Forgot to plug it in last night. When we have staff that are on the road, we see the cell phone as one of our safety precautions. A very simple workaround is, can we ensure that all staff have a car charger for their cell phone? It's part of what they're expected to have, if you have it in your budget and you're providing the cell phone, is that part of what comes with them? For those of us that live in areas where transmission drops based on the wind, it would appear, you might want to take a look at some of the transmission boosters for cell phones. Or also review service providers. Different providers have better coverage in certain parts of the province, and it's good to know. So there's some technical things that we can get, and there's an administrative component that we can look at as well. We've got a question?
We do have a question. There's somebody asking if you can give some FASD specific examples of risks and safety measures to address those risks.
So I'm going to suggest that what I have presented so far is that in fact these are specific to FASD clients. Within our service delivery models, we recognize most of our FASD affected individuals, they don't make appointments. They have a hard time getting to us. We go to them. And the implications are that we then need to be that much more diligent that the things that we consider common sense or regular practice, we don't have the luxury of being lax on those points. So with the driving being more of a service delivery approach, it's really, really important that we take that into account. With our FASD population, we know that oftentimes our caseloads are smaller, however, our work is bigger. They require more work. We're oftentimes providing some of the supported referrals. So we're using our vehicle as a way of getting folks to their appointments because that's part of how we keep them safe and keep them healthy. So these mechanisms for addressing the driving risks are equally as important because we are going to be including clients as part of who's in the vehicle, and we're also recognizing that this is an approach that we actually have to do more of. There will be more along the way that perhaps will feel FASD specific. With the changes in legislation around using the cell phone, again, we want to keep our staff safe. We want them to feel supported. Also, people back at the shop need to be updated around where are people? Are you on time for your appointment? Are you late for your appointment? Has something happened? And frontline staff really do feel quite pressed, really very demanded upon to be attentive to their client and the crises and the complex and complicated presentation, and at the same time address the needs of the agency. And so agencies need to know where their staff are, for sure. And many frontline staff do not feel like it's a good use of their time to pull over to the side of the road to make a phone call to say, I'm running late, or I'm now taking my client to this location. So Bluetooth, hands-free, voice-activated phones, so this again is that technical aspect, will be really important to support your staff to use, because staff will do their best job when they're getting all the support that they can. From the administrative place, from the training place, from the support place. So even though we're talking about something very simple, it has ramifications. It actually has some budget line implications. It has training and support implications. It has supervision implications. So this is actually about best practice. It's very important that we get good directions, that we've got maps. I've driven in areas where if things are named, I think I know where I'm going, and then I get turned around. Nothing like walking into a situation feeling like, you know, you're really not very competent, you couldn't get there on time, and you're rattled. That's important for our clients to not have to endure. They do best when we are able to engage with them in a calm and a relaxed way. We also need to keep ourselves safe. And so in some of our communities, folks will give directions based on a number of things. It could be landscape markers. Other folks will give range roads, but you know what, then the signs aren't there because they got knocked down by the snowplow. So we need to have information, direction shared with us in many, many different ways. Some of the technology is there with GPS and with OnStar. So again, as an agency from an administrative perspective, think about what are some of the technologies that can help our staff get to where they need to be in a way that is safe and that where they can be on time so that they show up feeling like they're on their game. Physical safeguards around driving. We talked about having a well-maintained vehicle, but in all honesty, as an agency, how do you know that? Have you done a walk about the car? Do you get any information about regular maintenance? How do you know that your staff have a well-maintained vehicle? We're sending them out. They're in community. They're away from the eyes and ears of other people. Again, we want to mitigate the risk. So this is one of the ways. Can we make sure that our vehicles are well-maintained? Doesn't mean that you have to have really expensive things. We just need to know that it's in good working order. Basic emergency kits, winter kits, those things also need to be part of expectations and they need to be part of policy and procedure. So you can hear that there's a physical and an administrative safeguard here. Agencies, you want to make sure that you've got documentation that you have indeed have audited, that in fact your staff are safe. And from that practical physical point of view, you want to see with your own eyes that staff have the equipment and then that they know how to use it. Also, reiterating the importance of seatbelts. And for those of us that drive clients to places, and if our clients are little people, we need to know that we have the proper car seats and they're properly installed. Again, wonderful example. Working where we actually brought in a health person to talk about seatbelt installation, the car seat installation rather, and many of us thought we were doing it right until we were shown how it was done. So again, this is a training implication, which is an administrative component, and it's also a safeguard physically in that you need to know, is that car seat, number one, was it on recall? Yes or no. Who provides the car seat? Is that something that the clients provide, or as an agency, if this is part of your work, is that something that's provided? The administrative safeguard for driving. When we did a polling of the staff around their concern for driving, most of us as women had very little experience with truly fixing our vehicle at the side of the road. And so, again, the work that we're doing, the services we're providing in the communities that we are, we would be well advised to make sure that we have access to that kind of training. Is it something that gets brought in on a staff meeting day? Are there funds available where a staff person can do that on their own time? Is there some cost sharing? Do you have a policy on weather and road conditions? Again, if a staff person is going to say it's -30, the roads are icy, I choose to stay home, it's a weather day, are they going to be respected for that decision? Do you have a policy by which everyone, you've had the conversation and people understand the protocols and the process around that? Are you auditing for any of the vehicle considerations? Are you looking at it? Are you documenting, in fact, that the equipment is there, it's in working order? Providing training. And then something that's really basic, that for our clients who oftentimes need more of our time, are we giving enough time in between our appointments so that we can get from one place to another in a safe and timely fashion? So if we are coming into FASD work having done other work where it's a 50-minute hour, you can go in with curriculum and you're in and you're out, most of us who work with FASD clients say that's not our reality. You go in with a plan and it goes right out the window the minute you walk through the door. Have have you scheduled yourself as a service provider too tightly so that you can't be responsive? Or if you are responsive, that then you're feeling anxious and very compromised around the next client or your next responsibility. All of that feeds into safe driving. If you're distracted behind the wheel, you're putting your staff at risk, you're putting yourself at risk, and if you're driving a client, you may be putting your client at risk. Any questions? I'll take a minute to breathe and take a sip. One of the other commonly identified risks in working with the FASD population in the ways that we do is this whole aspect of working alone. In traditional service delivery approaches, clients, families came into the office and you had a receptionist and you had other staff, or you were in a building where there were other tenants. This isn't the world for FASD service delivery. For us, the reality is we are going into community, we're going into people's homes, we are meeting with people in somebody else's home, but that's where they slept last night. So we have location of our visits really moves around a lot. Our clients oftentimes have complicated lives and they have a lot of crisis going on, and they usually at least initiate services with us when everything is in the toilet. They have burned a lot of bridges. It's possible that there are many things that they may be eligible for but they're not engaged with. And in order to assist them, we have to be able to connect. We need to assess that situation well, because doing relationship-based work means what you need is as important as what I need. And so it's bi-directional. We need to take care of our own needs as well as responding to the other person's. And we all have different levels of comfort. Some of that's based on experience and training, supervision, perhaps even just how long we've lived or what kind of life we've lived. Some of the concerns that have been raised around working alone have been things like we're going into situations where there are firearms or knives or baseball bats that are sitting by the side of the door, and we just have, you know, concerns, flags that go off around who has what and for what purpose. You notice that I used the term firearms. Most of my experience is working in rural communities where having firearms is not uncommon. They hunt. To use the word weapon to somebody who is a hunter is very offensive. It's not a weapon, it's a firearm. There's a very legitimate, specific purpose for the firearm. So when we are assessing risk and we're asking questions, we also need to have language that's appropriate to the setting. We also need to be aware that some things that seem innocuous in terms of we look at it and we wouldn't typically see it as a problem other than perhaps where it is location-wise. So a baseball bat at the side of the door and no one's playing baseball in the winter, you may have a question about what's the purpose of the bat. So don't just think of firearms and weapons as those typical things like knives, guns, crossbows. There are other things that we need to be thinking of as well. Working alone, and again, a big surprise knowing our client population, staff talk about the dogs. They can deal with the drugs. They can deal with unsafe, volatile kind of scenarios, but it's the dogs that really get them worried. And so good information to know that when we're working alone, what kind of questions are we asking of the referral source, right? What kind of contact do we have with the client around my need as a service provider to be able to enter in feeling safe? And when people are afraid of dogs, this isn't just sort of low-grade anxiety. Oftentimes it's through the roof. So we really need to be mindful and thoughtful around how do you address that? We do have folks who have substance abuse issues, they have poverty issues, and so the criminal lifestyle is not foreign to us when we're working with this population. They can either be victimized in this front, or they're part of the action. So again, the concern for drug trafficking, drug use, manufacturing drugs, these are important concerns for us as we go in. And you can hear that it would be really hard to hire a person that knows all of this right from the get-go. We're asking for a skill set and a knowledge base that is broad and encompassing, and at some places we actually need to have it be quite specific. Working alone also means that oftentimes we're working in people's settings. So whether we call it their home or where they're couch surfing, it may be that they are living with other people who have impulse control issues. They may be volatile from a behavioral point of view. They may have undiagnosed, untreated mental illness. Wherever the behavior is coming from, that working alone places us in harm's way when we are supposed to, and it is best practice, to work with everyone who's in the circle of influence for this individual. That is truer for our FASD clients than most. I think it's best practice as a human being, but specifically with FASD, we know that we need to bring on board everyone who's around this client. And so we may have a client who, him or herself, is not violent. However, where they're living, there may be things going on. So again, just that vantage point of what are you looking at? What are you assessing? Is it their clients presenting issues? Or is it that contextual reality around we've got other people coming in? Another question.
Yes, and someone's asked if you could repeat the question when you answer it so that everyone can hear it. But question around who could provide training in environmental risk assessment? So do you go to police for that, for instance, or who might be able to provide that kind of training? And also, who provides training related to car seat installation? I heard you mention public health. Is that the first source that you would go to in any other region like Edmonton, for instance?
So the question was really how to access training for environmental assessments and also installation of car seats. And the quick and dirty answer is it depends. It depends which community you're in. It depends on, and it really does. I mean, we definitely have access to some training in our rural areas free of charge, and I hear from folks in Edmonton who go to access the same training, and there is a significant fee attached. So the good news is you're asking the question, and now you need to use your community connections to chase down, is anybody else offering presentations or training in this area? So different people around the car seat installation safety, again, depending on your communities and your connections, it could be your fire department. It could be public health. They oftentimes help a health promotion person who's designated to provide training on a number of issues, and car seat installation is one of them. So the good news is you're thinking about it, and the bad news is it depends. I would really, it is one of my biases in that, it is just imperative that we have connections in our community when we're talking about safeguards and then risks as well. So when you know your community, you know whether or not there's something that's being offered that's put on by adult education or a community presentation on a particular topic. So there is this connection and communication that's imperative, and it's implied throughout everything, that you will know where your resources are only based on if you know who's in your community. For me, I frame that as relationship-based work. You need to know what your needs are, then you need to know where you are and who in your community is doing similar work and is able to either partner or open up what they're doing to your staff or agency. So from my perspective anyways, there's many, many benefits around working that way. One of the safeguards around working alone, and we'll come to that later, but it's a good place to tell you now too, is it's important that community know who you are. When you are, it's like neighborhood watch. When you have extra eyes and ears, they know you, they know the work that you're doing, they're going to be looking out for you too. They may have information, they may be aware of who you're working with, and without breaching confidentiality, just give you a heads up. Maybe this isn't a good day to go to this community. Lots of things go on. There may be some gang activity. In some communities, when the end of the month where checks are given, things go bad for a few days. And so you need to know the rhythm of your community to know what's going on for the risk assessment, and then for your safeguards, for training and support, you need to know who's who in the neighborhood as well. For environmental assessments, it would depend on what kind of environment you're talking about. Where there may be health hazards. So let's say there's an environmental concern because someone is cooking drugs. It's a drug house. I would check with police around whether there are any concerns in particular neighborhoods or in a particular house. That really, again, is based on your connections with your community partners. Sometimes you'll get notice. This isn't a good time. You shouldn't be going into this neighborhood. And that doesn't come from the informal connections, that's actually coming quite formally then through justice, and maybe from other people who are doing work in the community. Public health nurses are also another source of information, where, particularly when we're dealing with young children, they've either been in the home or they also have their monitoring mechanisms. So environmental assessment being the community, you'd want to check in with who are the other people who are delivering services similar to how we are, where we go into the home, we go into the community, we're on the road. Okay? Some technical safeguards. Now these are, again, I would say this is best practice for any of us that are doing creative outreach, home visitation approaches. And it's that much more important when we're working with this population because they tend to be in more trouble and they have steps back. So it's not that we don't get progress, we do. And we also have relapses and things that go sideways on us quite quickly. So safeguards for working alone from a technical perspective. Very simple from an administrative point of view. Have a policy on getting digital pictures of your staff, of their vehicle, of their license plate number, and of their VIN number. Because if somebody isn't where they're supposed to be, they're not answering their phone, and you are concerned, you now have a very easy digital mechanism by which you just push send to the police. And they have a visual, they've got information, and you don't have to go rooting for it. So it's, again, something that is quite easily done, and then document that as one of your policies for mitigating risk. Bad news when you're doing services in people's homes is, there could be a drug bust that happens while you're there. For whatever reason, the police might come in for a number of concerns, and you just happen to be there at that time. I'm not going to say that happens regularly, but I'm thinking, the potential of that happening is actually fairly high. It would be important for you to have some ID that identified you as being a staff person for an agency who is doing work for a client. Now, it's great if you have your driver's license, that's picture ID, but that doesn't really tell the police that you actually are not a person of concern to them. So this would be ID that you'd want to have on your person. So if it's your policy to leave your purse locked in your trunk of your vehicle when you go in to do a visit, you would want to have that ID on you. So I'm not saying that you need to make it really formal and wear a name tag, but you might want to have it in your back pocket or something that is clipped to the inside of your jacket, and you can say, to the police officer, I'm a staff person, I work with this agency, my ID is inside my pocket, can I give it to you, please? That then gets you out of harm's way. I mean, make for a good story, but I'm not thinking it's really how you want to spend your day, is getting taken down to the police station waiting for someone else to pick you up. Technical safeguards, working alone, cell phone charged. Your cell phone needs to be on. And if you're going into a situation where you think that you are in harm's way, you need to have some policy and procedures around calling when you get in the house to let people know you got there okay. And you may have a policy around them calling you back when you're supposed to be gone. Again, and there's lots of people have been quite ingenious around how they do that, but you want to have some kind of a mechanism where that cell phone is actually used to just check in on you, and that you aren't the person who's always having to initiate the call. That's awkward. You know, you're having a crying jag, and you know what? Just wait a minute. I need to call the office. Not appropriate. However, if the phone rings or if you get a text message, you can say, "A moment, I need to take this call," and you're responding to both your client and to the need of your agency to know where you're at. Physical safeguards for working alone. You need to wear appropriate clothing. And by appropriate, I'm meaning appropriate on a whole bunch of different fronts. The high-heeled shoes that are part of the PowerPoint presentation, that is what you are not to wear. For, again, lots of reasons. Many of our clients are in poverty. Going in dressed to the nines creates a bigger power differential than what's already there. It has somebody else feeling less than. And for some of our clients, they already have enough negative self-images and messages that they take on. They don't need you visually there dressed in expensive, fancy clothes to reinforce that negative image they have of themselves. It's also a safety issue. When you are in shoes that wouldn't allow you to run, you are in harm's way. Many of us who have worn high-heeled shoes, and if there's guys part of the presentation, I don't know about you, but if you've worn high-heeled shoes, maybe for the prevention of domestic violence fundraising initiatives, you'll know that it's easy to trip on shoes. It's easy to twist your ankle. If you needed to move quickly, you actually are quite compromised. They look pretty, they're great, but for our work, there would not be appropriate. So that's footwear. Again, thinking of our context, so actual application, we're going into people's homes. Many of us have been raised that you take your shoes off at the door. And many of the homes that we go into, that would not be advisable. Now you have to think about how you're going to manage that. Are you going to put on some disposable booty thing that you put over the outside of your shoes so that you don't put, you're being respectful. You're not taking dirt into their house, and you're also not taking anything out with you. Or are you going to take a second pair of shoes that you put on so that if you needed to leave quickly, you're not in your socks? Something that's hard-soled. If you step on something sharp, again, limiting the risk of being punctured in the foot with something that isn't what's supposed to be there. So enough said about the footwear. And we also need to talk about style of dress. And as a service provider, I need to be myself. I also need to be mindful of who I'm engaging with. And so if the style is, belly tops, where your stomach is showing, lots of see-through material, again, a particular image that's being projected, you, again, could be setting up a dynamic that isn't very helpful for service delivery. And that really is a supervision issue. It's not something that there's a cut and dry answer to that, but I think that people need to have that discussion around what is appropriate given our clientele, given that you may be working predominantly with women and children in some situations, and they're hanging around with other people who are guys, and maybe your style of dress is seen as an invitation for some advances that you're not wanting. You could be seen as a threat. You're coming in all gussied up, and your female client may be feeling like you're there and really quite a distraction for her partner, or her father, or her brother, or whatever. So it's, again, just a sensitive place for us as service providers as well. It's a hard conversation to have, but would invite you to think about, is it something that, that you can do in a staff meeting or in supervision? Nonviolent crisis intervention, you know, if you can mitigate risk and do it in a way that keeps everybody safe, you're really on solid ground. And where we actually position ourselves in a room sends a very powerful message. So with our FASD affected individuals who may have problems with comprehension, with regulation, with sensory issues, they will be using a lot of their resources to manage the moment. If you inadvertently sit in a place that blocks their escape, if they get upset and one of their coping mechanisms is to flee, and you're in the way, they may not have any other choice but to stomp on you. So be mindful about where you sit. It's your protection as well to be able to have an escape route. And sometimes just the way the place is set up, you may not have any choice, but you need to be thinking about it. So again, it's a physical safeguard, but you can hear that when you're going to think of that approach, you're going to need to be thinking about training, and you're going to need to be thinking about some of the administrative implications. Talked about driving and having a vehicle. Well, it's great if everything's working, but you park in a way that someone can block your escape or your exit. So again, you can hear how important it is that as a staff person that I am well-resourced when I'm doing my work. I have to be thinking about a lot of things simultaneously. I'm running late, I'm worried about my client, I'm pulling up into a parking lot. If I'm too focused on what I need to be doing when I go in, I may not be paying attention to the fact that my home visit, my work has already started when I park my car. I need to be thinking about safety at that point. So park in a way where you can't be blocked. And in many of our situations, we don't know what we're walking into, so we might need to leave quickly. Park in a way where you don't have to reverse. You just put her in drive and you go. So again, things to be thinking about. You might need to have some training, additional training on it. Just talking about it in a presentation is the beginning, not the end place. Any questions? Comments?
People have been asking about the availability of the handouts. If you could just let them know that a copy of the handout with the PowerPoint will be sent to them after the presentation is over.
So the question was, will the PowerPoint presentation be made available to participants? And the answer is a resounding yes. And it will be both sent to you as well as made available on the website. So no worries if your email box gets really full and you miss an email. You can then access it. I know that in the past people have used a 3-week mark, but stay tuned, it'll be made available. I'd mentioned about, thinking when you're working alone and moving into somebody else's living space, that you might want to think about where are you putting your valuables. And it's really good to say, put your purse, lock it up in the trunk. And if you do that right in front of a client's house in a community that's maybe kind of sketchy, I'm not thinking that's a great strategy. And it's only because you've done the right thing but in the wrong place. So if you could do that before you leave the office, or you do that as you leave home, and you take it out as you need. There's a really good phrase of, take the least amount of stuff with you that you need. So, and I, don't do what I do because I'm not walking the talk here on this one at all. I'm usually lugging boxes and way too much stuff. You might want to just take a look and see what you can purge. Are you going to have all of your credit cards, all of your ID in the wallet that you take to work every day? Or is there a way that you can limit the risk? If something gets stolen, you only have to call one credit card company and not 6 or 7. So again, just some of those safety precautions around protecting your privacy and safeguarding your information. so that people do things for all kinds of reasons. And you know, if I'm poor and struggling and I am not looking like I'm eligible for the services that I'm thinking that I need, I may do some bad things for good reasons. I'm trying to keep body and soul together. If I have an opportunity to take some of your personal information and sell it on the street and make some money so that I can be warm and well fed, I'm likely to take advantage of the opportunity. So this is our job to help other people stay the course about making good decisions. So remove temptation, put it in a place that isn't visible, and put it in a place invisible where no one else is watching you. We also have vehicles that have different setups now where everything actually is quite visible. So if you've got a really big purse and you have an SUV and there is no trunk to speak of, think carefully around the what next. So do you downsize your purse? Is there a way that you can put your valuables in a place that isn't going to be visible? I've alluded to this several times, and I will just now take it out and blow it up big. The best safeguard you have is a well-supported staff person. The staff person really needs to know themselves well, so they need to have an accurate assessment of their own competence. They need to be in a very supported place. Self-care is imperative. We cannot give what we do not have. And our clients are needy. They're needing to be reparented. They have lots of emotional unmet needs. And so we're being tapped all the time around being there for them. Add to that our FASD clients are not received well in community by and large. Most frontline staff do a lot of advocacy. And you're going in and you're begging, you're pleading, you're negotiating, you're mediating. I mean, you're drawing on all kinds of skill sets to do this work. We need to make sure our staff have what they need. We can't ask them to do this work without making sure that as a person, not just for professional outcomes, but as a person, that they are really, truly cared for. Because we're actually wanting them to do that with their clients. The clients need to have an authentic experience of really being cared for. So those of us who've been parents, you know what it's like when you're done. You need someone else to step in. And if we had help along the way, maybe we wouldn't have as many done days. So as agencies, it's up to us then to be proactive in supporting our staff. So the acronym that for me is really, really helpful around self-care is actually the acronym NURSE. N stands for nourishment. I can't begin to tell you how many times myself and others don't eat properly. We get really busy. We've got demands. Somebody else's need is more important than ours. And so we'll skip breakfast, we'll live on coffee, we'll drive through Tim Hortons. We don't listen to our body cues. We override the hunger. We override needing to use the washroom. There's serious consequences for that in the moment, but long term. And in caring for others, we cannot exploit those that are doing this work. It's unethical, it's unkind, and at the end of the day, it's not how we build community capacity by burning people out. And our bodies need to be resourced. The U in NURSE stands for understanding. Understanding of myself, but also understanding of FASD, understanding of my community. So there's a framework by which, when I have good information, it's accurate, it's up to date, it's relevant, I then am in a better place to make some good decisions. So as a staff person, I need to know what are my triggers. Where do I feel appreciated? And we don't all get appreciation the same way. Some of us want to be given challenges. Others of us want to be appreciated. Others of us want to be able to do a job well done and have it showcased. So we need to know ourselves well so that we can ask for what we need. And as supervisors and agency management, we need to create those opportunities where we create a culture, an organizational culture of understanding without judgment ourselves and the other. Oftentimes, difference is seen as bad. We work at different levels. We work at different speeds. We have different gifts. We can't have that discussion if we aren't self-aware and then have a safe environment by which to process that information. And understanding is critical. We all are doing this work with these individuals for a reason. Can we actually put that into words? Do we share that information? The R for nurse is relax. So some of us have on-off. We work like demons, and our off switch is we go to bed. We get up and we start working again. Our off switch, we go to bed, and we just keep doing this. That's called unbalanced. And to do this work, we need to have a sense of balance and some options. And so being able to relax is a very helpful strategy for ourselves. And I'm going to strongly suggest again, and you can highlight this if you're taking notes, you will only take your client as far as you are yourself. You can't take them any further. If you do not know yourself, what are some relaxation techniques? What are some relaxation activities? How do you have a discussion about relaxation? If you're uncomfortable in that area, you're not going to help that FASD affected individual think about how do they manage their anxiety. How are they going to be good to themselves in a way so that actually they can work with their disability but maximize their potential. So you can hear how the invitation is you have to do your own personal work so that you can do the professional work. They're linked. No surprise for us who've been doing relationship-based work for a long time. You are the tool, and the work will only be as good as you are in terms of taking care of yourself. Sleep, huge issue, and probably for different reasons, different folks either sleep too much or don't sleep enough or have interrupted sleep. And we know that this sleep is also a huge issue for our clients. And again, so the better resourced you are from a sleep perspective, your brain is thinking clearer, you can be more responsive, you can be more creative, you can problem solve. And I think we only just need to have that moment of self-reflection. When we are in our best place, oftentimes it's when we've been well rested. We've had relaxation, but we've had sleep. We are not hungry. So then physically, and we're biological beings, as are our clients. If we don't attend to those basic needs, we cannot ask ourselves or the other to move in an area that they actually do not have the physical capacity to do. So agencies, you know, if your staff need mental health days, if they need time off, see that as a gift, an opportunity to regenerate and rejuvenate so they can come back and do their work. When our clients need a break, when they need to have a safe place to sleep, that's just not a nice thing to have. It's actually essential because we are asking them to make change. And we know that none of us can make changes if we are compromised in that physical sense. Our resources are Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're moving to what is needed in the here and now, and it's survival. Many of the changes we're suggesting are not about immediate survival from their perspective. It would be a nice to have. Food, clothing, shelter. Having a safe place to lay your head down is pretty important. And exercise in my world should be a 4-letter word, because I don't like exercise. And that being said, there's been just some really lovely ways of how to support the body in a way that's a good fit. So yes, exercise is good, and now you actually have to rejig it so it's a good fit for you. For me, I don't like sweating, so I'll be right up front. I'm not running, not happening, but I will walk. And again, knowing myself well, I like people. So if I actually have a buddy to walk with, I'm more likely to walk because I like the social interaction. So can you hear the importance of knowing yourself and your client well? Because if you're going to use any of these strategies, they have to be personalized if they're actually going to anchor and take root. And that's really what we're hoping for all of our clients and staff development, is the good stuff actually can take up more room and that we have less complications where we're feeling less than adequate. Administrative working alone. Go ahead, Jean.
There's another question that I think you'd want to add some comments to. Someone's asked if you could provide some tips, safety tips for work that's done in a non-home environment, like a school, for instance. So this is a person who's working with children and youth, and they're often in a school setting. What are some of the considerations for that kind of setting, once you're able to address that?
So the question was how to create safety in other community settings, in particular school settings. And so without knowing all the details, and you can hear my bias is contextual information is imperative, things to consider would be privacy. What door do you go in? Are there windows in rooms? I've worked in settings where, yes, there's walls and a door, but there's no soundproofing. So really, how confidential is your information? You will not know that in advance of actually having a walk through a building, and also talking with some of the staff. I mean, oftentimes staff who work in that environment know where the hiccups are. That this area here is very, very noisy. It'll be distracting. This area over here, you've got no confidentiality whatsoever. Everybody will see the coming and goings on. So again, talk to the school to raise your concerns. What are the principles that you're operating by? If it's around confidentiality, privacy, then for yourself, if you're working, I'm making it up, let's say working with a person who is a teen and has some volatile issues, you might want to also then been talking about how close are you to help? So these would be considerations. I have a story again from the front line. A young, delightful woman with pervasive developmental delays, highly suspected, prenatally exposed, very, very volatile, solid young woman, history of aggression. So good information to know going into initiating services. She had shared something with another student, and the other student didn't give it back, and there was a bit of a kerfuffle. And the teacher went to grab this young individual's property from the other student. So when you know about nonviolent crisis intervention work, you know that actually personal property is part of your personal space. So that is no different than coming in and grabbing me by the collar. This young girl grabbed the item that was hers and almost ran over the teacher. So when we're talking about school settings and safety, the biggest thing is how well do you know your client? How well are you prepared to be aware of what are triggers? What are some of the strategies? So again, you're talking, yes, assessing the environment and the context, but then also doing a really good evaluation of where are you as a staff person around some of these fairly savvy skills. But they're simple. You just need to be thinking about them. With this young girl, if I was sitting in a room, I definitely would not be blocking the door. I also wouldn't be sitting behind the desk. She had issues with authority. So again, be thinking strategically, mindfully around your setting, your client, their safety and well-being, your safety and well-being, and then you have to actually work it out from there. So you've got basic ingredients, but the actual recipe is really going to depend on what you know and what you're comfortable applying. So with a new staff person who is working with that type of client, you may want to basically be in an office space that has privacy, but you've got very easy access. Somebody would hear if there was an episode that was happening and could come and check on you. If you have somebody who's very experienced, you may mitigate that risk by saying, you know what, I think I'm competent and capable enough to deal with anything that might happen in that regard. It's more important that I take care of her psychological well-being and ensure that we have a little more privacy. So hopefully that gives you some things to think about. Administrative safeguards for working alone. Training. Did I say training? Training. And training different ways. Information is great. I love learning. And information does not necessarily translate into skill. And just because I learned the skill once doesn't mean that I'm applying it. And even if I'm applying it in one place doesn't mean I'm transferring it to another. So this training then is an invitation for us to think of all the different ways we learn. I learn by watching others do work. Job shadowing is great. It also lessens that sense of isolation, because this work has us feeling very different as service providers. Our population base, the way we deliver the work, can have us feeling a little bit like aliens, even in some organizations that do very, very good work, but our paradigm is different. Orientation. I'm not talking a half-day orientation. Orientation is more than just reading policy and procedures and your staff handbook. Orientation is about other staff, it's about your organization, it's about your community. That takes more than just 1 or 2 days. It's part of training. You can job shadow other community partners as well. You know how they used to have the ride-along program with the police. If you really want to understand somebody's job, you know, walk a day in their shoes. So if you want to build that connection in community as part of your orientation, look at, can you facilitate an opportunity for staff to job shadow other staff that are doing an entirely different job, but maybe they're going to be your referral source coming to you, or maybe you want to refer to them. That relationship building and having a clear understanding of each other's work goes a long way. My bias again is regular reflective supervision. I am not talking case management, although case management is very important, so it's part of the deal, it's just not the only thing. The reflective piece is, who am I as a staff person when I'm doing this work? How can I be supported to know that I'm holding back, or I'm doing too much, or I'm doing a good job, or what are the feelings that come up? So this kind of supervision can't be done by just anybody. Supervisors need training too, and support. So when we work relationally, it's imperative that the support we get is also relational, which is very different than pulling out, you know, a caseload weighting formula and going through, you know, do you have any more room for another referral? It's important work to do, but you can also talk about, how is that feeling? Are you feeling accomplished? Are you feeling successful? Are you feeling overwhelmed? How does that show up in your work? So the training, the supervision, and doing that in a way that builds capacity is imperative. I've already talked about community orientation. Examples of positive working relationships with the police, with public health in particular, would be 2 organizations that I see as being critical partners in our communities. They know information that we don't know. They are, with relationship, are willing to share information and opportunities with us. And that just bodes well for us individually, but also for our community. All of us need to be working better together. And there's been lots of examples of where we haven't shared information well, and we have missed opportunities. And that's really unfortunate. Bruce Perry has got the 7 R's nailed down pat. And with our FASD individuals, with our overburdened families, with ourselves, it doesn't matter. This is a human biological reality of how do we grow, how are we supported. And in doing the relational work, these are non-negotiable. These need to be present for us to do our work well and for us to take care of each other. And so the R's are, we need to be respectful, and that is something that is defined in relationship. You might not know that it's respectful to me if you, and then fill in the blank. So we need to have discussions around how is respect lived out. Relational means, please show up as a whole person. Don't hide behind your role, your professional designation. Be there as a real human being. There are really appropriate times to laugh and to cry with our clients. That is not a breach of boundaries. It's doing the work together. We need to be responsive, and we can't be responsive as frontline staff with our FASD clients if we're not well supported. Our capacity is diminished. Our work needs to be rewarding. Figure that out. What are your rewards? For some people, they could care less about their pay. They would do the work free. But it is really important that they get appreciation. And if we miss that opportunity, we will lose good people. Our clients also need to be rewarded for the hard work that they do. And the fact that they're even there for us when we show up is a real privilege. And they need to be commended for what it takes to say yes to someone, to have them come into your life, to have them be part of witnessing your work. Rhythmic, you can just insert in there rules and routines and rituals. Do you have regular meeting times with your clients? Do you have regular meeting times for staff meetings? Do you have regular meeting times for supervision? Again, that's a biological reality that when we have predictability, there's some ease internally with all of our mechanisms. Things settle. Repeat, repeat, repeat with our FASD clients. So true. But I'm going to suggest that's equally true for me and for you. Our brain can only take in so much information. What I'm using rises to the top, and what I'm not using kind of slides off. If I'm needing what I at one time knew but has slid off, I need refreshers, I need reminders, and it's okay to have training more than once. We forget. We have mandate drift. We get pulled in different directions. That's true for our clients too. Their friends want them to do something, going to get them in trouble. You know that, I know that. And we're saying something different, but we're maybe not there as often. So again, repetition. How can your message go in and take up a little bit more airtime? And reciprocal. I don't think there's a human being alive that wants to be only on the receiving end. There needs to be some give and take. Needs to be appropriate for sure. But reciprocity is a very healthy dynamic of human interaction. And so be thinking about, how do you allow that? Many agencies have policies and procedures regarding whether clients can give gifts or not, or whether you can give a gift or not. Think about that not just from a policy and procedure place, but also from that relationship place. So your vantage point now is really focusing on the interpersonal dynamic between staff and client. Any questions?
I think just one question came in about the S in nurse. Yeah.
Okay, the question was the S in nurse, so the acronym NURSE, the S stands for sleep. I would probably put a slash in there and say support as well, but then we get into a spelling problem, so we won't do that. Oh, and then we have some other S's being mentioned over here. With working with our clients that have prenatal exposure to alcohol, working with their caregivers, working in community, we can train, we can give information, you can have skills, but you know what, at the end of the day, you need to have the right person in the job. And that's part of recruiting. It's part of a mindset of creating a culture of how can you move people into places where you maximize their gifts, and in doing so, that for them is in and of itself rewarding. And so you're going to have some retention for sure. And you're going to get clients that stay engaged with services. Our FASD clients may have all kinds of issues, and one of their gifts is they're extremely intuitive. They really get when they're being judged. And you don't have to say very much, and maybe nothing at all, because many of us have a look, right, that could stop traffic. So it's important that we have staff in the position and working with the clients, because it's a goodness of fit. So it's not about bad staff, it's not about bad clients. It really is around, have you lined up your resources appropriately? So in talking about the personality and thinking about that with staff, really some of the key points is being non-judgmental. With our FASD individuals, being as intuitive as they are, as impulsive as they are, as having difficulty with comprehension and social environments, the who I am really is as important, if not more important, than what I do. So just again, thinking about our interactions from that perspective. No doubt about it, with our FASD clientele, staff need to be creative, persistent, action-oriented. And that's taking into account all those risks that we talked about and making sure you have all the safeguards lined up equally as well. Experience is very important. In the PCAP model, the parent-child assistance model that is around FASD prevention, in Seattle, if a staff person has been in recovery for more than 5 years as a client, they can apply for a staffing position. So when we're talking about FASD work, sometimes our clients are not themselves affected. It may be their child, and they may have other things that are going on. So be thinking about, for safety reason, what is your level of experience with the circumstances that our clients find themselves in? And then how can you expand that capacity? And it's not that we all have to have addiction history or mental health history or domestic violence history or ourselves be affected or have a child that's affected. We need to then find a way to have that kind of exposure and to then be a good listener around what are the stories from that place. What is it really like to not fit ever? How does that show up in different people? As a white, fairly competent woman, I will not know that from personal experience unless I put myself into situations where I'm out of my depth. However, if I can develop really good listening skills, I can learn from other people's stories. And what a gift that so many of our clients are willing to share with us. And that we also have opportunities as staff to meet with one another. Talked about training, 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 and then practice, practice, practice. For skill development, if you've been doing a lot of work with infants and young children and all of a sudden you need to shift gears and talk about motivational interviewing with the caregiver, if you haven't done that in a while, you may feel a little rusty. So you might want to then find opportunities for refreshers and practice opportunities. And that will vary in each organization. Training, I have to say, with our population, anything that touches their life, we need to know about. So fasten your seatbelt, because it can and will be about just about everything, from health to justice, landlord and tenant, appeals, the list just goes on. So the training is really important, and it needs to be relevant training. FASD work, in some ways, it is not something that's over and above. It's taking what we really know and then taking it apart and being that much more diligent about it. Most of what has been suggested in the research as well as in this presentation is not new news to you. What's different is that you take your attention and you focus on it, and then that you bring it forward. So take your training needs from the staff, and then the staff need to say, what is it that my clients are into that I need to support them with? And then I need support to support them. We talked about skill development of being used practice, staff meetings, supervision. Case consultation is fabulous, so don't think you're in this alone. Rely on your colleagues. We have many FASD service providers from many different places. Call on one another. Run something by. You can still protect people's confidentiality and just say, I've got a situation. This is where I find myself. What could you advise? That builds safety for the staff in that they're consulting with other people who have maybe more experience, maybe more expertise, and they then can integrate that into their practice. Self-reflection is imperative. What we're talking about in some ways is new and in other ways not. FASD has been with us forever and always. Working with individuals in a caring, responsive relationship is also not necessarily new. What's new is that we're actually being very deliberate about it. So think about the best practice that comes from other places. So we used to have VONs, visiting nurses. We've got people who do lots of liaison work. in communities, FMNI workers, First Nations and Métis and Inuit workers, who work differently than the traditional way that we've done work in the past decades. So there's things that are from the past that have always been done. We can pull forward and be more deliberate about doing that. The newness is really about that deliberate intent. The fact is we've got a legacy and we've got really, really good history around providing services to individuals who find themselves in some way compromised. Enjoy your accomplishments. Take time. As much as the work is very demanding, if we do not take the time to celebrate, we'll lose steam. We need to know what we're doing well, and that needs to be celebrated. So more than just a good job slap on the back. We want to actually have just protected time to allow this to really take the spotlight. How did you do that? Most of us aren't very good at getting the praise and letting it in and also giving thanks. So accomplishments really is a practice, and like most things, the more you do it, the easier it gets. So think about what could be a daily practice around how do you say thank you and work from a strength-based place. Count your blessings, however that might look for you. Find a period of time where you can just drop a note to somebody, an email, thanking them for the support that you've received. So that attitude of gratitude is a way of celebrating the connections and the meaningful engagement. As an agency or as a community, participate in annual appreciation events where we know we can't do this work alone. We do need everybody at the table. And you get more people with honey than you do with vinegar. So rather than look at what's missing, let's talk about what we're doing well and give examples of that. Keep an ongoing file of every positive thing that comes your way, because some days you're going to need it. To celebrate the accomplishments, you actually need to pause. This is something where push your chair back, put your feet on the table, and just look out the window or look at your wall or have a visualization experience. But slow down, take a breath, and just let things be. And that is part of being reflective and making that happen. And that can be done at an individual level, and I'm going to suggest it's a very helpful thing to do in supervision, so a one-on-one, in peer supervision, so a group of people, in a staff meeting, and as an organization. Communities also are learning to do this as well. So find out what's working in your communities, piggyback on them, because I'm going to suggest that this is all good work, and when we do this part well, we actually resource our staff so that they then can make really good decisions, assess situations well, maximize their safeguards, and that is all about personal safety and well-being for our frontline staff. So I'll just pause here, ask for any more questions or comments.
Another question, and it's someone's asking whether the 2 incidents where staff have been killed by people who were affected by FASD, whether those incidents have triggered the development of any new safety measures or regulations. And are you aware of those events, and what's been the follow-up?
So there's a question around what has been the implications of 2 very tragic events where FASD affected individuals have killed another person. And I don't know all the details for each of those situations. One that comes to mind, though, and that we've alluded to and talked about, is how important it is to communicate information. And so that's an administrative consideration around risk management and safeguard, is when we get referrals, we need to actually make sure that we've talked to the referral source and we've asked information that pertains to our staff's safety. It may be that when we're going into an unknown, that we also take a look at who goes with us. Now, in the cities, that may feel like, well, hard to do but possible. In some of our rural areas, maybe not as possible. So then we need to be quite creative around that. So what I do know about those situations is that it, number one, gave FASD a really bad rap and makes our work that much harder. And number two, the importance of working together and in community, so that sharing of information is absolutely imperative. We would all do our work differently if we had full information about our client. And oftentimes that's why, as frontline staff, we advocate with our client when they go to appointments, is we have more of that information. And so we're sharing it in a way that supports the client to access, because they're the worst historians, and there are things that they may not know, may not remember, or choose not to share. When you've been in a relationship with someone for long enough, or they've accessed other services, we do then have information that previously wouldn't have been ours to have. So you can hear, right? I mean, there's some things that are done on faith, that basically you have trust that as you have relationships with your community partners, that there's a way that you can work together in support of the client. So again, client's need is placed first. That doesn't contravene the fact that we're also taking care of our staff. So how much better would it have been for a staff person to know that this individual had some significant historical events where it would not be advisable to be alone in his company. It doesn't mean she wouldn't work with him. It would just mean that, what you would do and where you would do it would be different. And then we could have saved him the grief of this kind of an outcome and the consequences that come from that. So that's where we're meeting the client's need. We understand that if we don't do the checks and balances at this front, we put them in harm's way. They do bad things that get them into so much trouble. And we have a responsibility to be the external brain. So sharing of information, again, we have to abide by all the legislation. And I do think that there are ways that we can work together and think about balancing the need to protect privacy and then the need to share information in a way that meets the needs of the client. So I don't think we're there yet, but I do think that these situations really highlighted the need for information sharing and a community approach, a collaborative approach, the multidisciplinary team approach. That's the model that most of us are working with in our FASD work. We need it to be happening at this level as well. Thank you for the question.
No other questions?
So if there's no other questions, I want to just thank everybody for your questions. It was really, really helpful. It's nice to have some engagement, as well as just thank you for your interest in this area. I think it's overdue, as well as just really important. So share the good news, as well as continue to have the conversations, because we do have more things that we need to work on, and that will happen best if we're talking to one another. So take care, everybody. All the best.
Teresa, thank you very much for a very practical presentation on safety. I think it is a critical area that we need to be addressing in a continuous way. And so I'm hoping people that have watched today will take this information back to their particular agencies and begin that discussion further if they haven't already. There was a question around whether this information will be available on a DVD. It will be on the website. So Teachers TV will post that this presentation in the near future, and you can get it off the FASD-CMC.alberta.ca website and download it from there. And if you do need an actual copy, please contact Amy Castor, and she'll get that information to us, and we'll get you a DVD. The evaluations will be mailed to you shortly. Your feedback on these sessions is very, very important. We can't stress that enough. So please respond to that email. The next session is scheduled for November 30th at 9 a.m. with Dr. Gail Andrews, and she will be focusing on FASD 101. We look forward to seeing you at the end of November. Thank you.